Hi class, welcome to the Mod 9 lecture. The topic for Module 9 is a continuation on the membrane structure and function pertaining really to energy. And we will also have a brief introduction to cellular respiration. So some of the material is repeated or similar to what we covered in Mod 8. So there's some new information in here, but there is some overlap. And that's by design. These are important topics, and cellular respiration is a big metabolic pathway. So I want to make sure that you have the appropriate background information before we move into that. All right, so we're going to cover energy from chapter 5, and then in chapter 6 will be the introduction to cellular respiration. Which we'll continue that into module 10. So we've been talking about energy, which is simply the ability to cause some type of change or to perform work. And we have two types of energy. There is kinetic energy, which is energy of motion, energy of movement. And then potential energy is where we see it in biological molecules are in the chemical bonds that build our big biomolecules. So those things like polysaccharides. An example of kinetic energy is the process of photosynthesis, and the energy would be coming from the sun in the form of light energy. Okay. So thermal energy is a type of movement, and specifically it's the energy associated with the random movement of atoms and molecules. So that is kinetic energy since it is associated with movement. Now let's differentiate that again from heat. Heat is the transfer of energy, of thermal energy from one object to another. And chemical energy is the same thing as potential energy. You can think of potential energy as being stored in the many chemical bonds that build together our various biomolecules. Chemical energy or potential energy is significant because it gives an organism the power to do everything that it needs, to perform all of the work of the cell. Now, our field of thermodynamics is simply the study of energy transformations. And we use the word system to describe the matter that we're specifically interested in. And then surroundings is everything else, or the rest of the universe, the environment, if you will. Now, our first law of thermodynamics is the law of conservation of energy, and it states that the amount of energy in the universe is constant. It may change forms, it does change forms, but the total amount of energy out there in the universe is the same. Our second law of thermodynamics states that energy conversions or changes are going to increase disorder in the universe, so in the environment. And that is also known as entropy, which is a measure of randomness or disorder. So looking again at the example of a combustion engine and a cell, they are proper to compare because they use the same reactants, some type of fuel, and then oxygen, molecular oxygen, since there's two of them, and then produce the same waste products, which are carbon dioxide and water. We are going to spend quite a bit of time in Module 10 focusing on cellular respiration, which are the energy conversions in a cell. And that's done to generate energy in the form of ATP. Some energy is lost in the form of heat, but organisms like ourselves that are endothermic utilize that heat energy as part of the internal core body temperature. So both of these are about potential energy in the fuel being converted into kinetic energy through our metabolism. So glucose, here we're looking at the bigger molecule of it, the ring structure of glucose and molecular oxygen go through the process of cellular respiration to provide us with the energy we need for cellular work. Now, some chemical reactions either produce energy or need energy. And this gets to the exergonic and endergonic reactions. Those were probably new words for you, at least in Module 8. In the exergon, there is energy to exit, go away from the reaction. So there is a release of energy. Oppositely, the endergonic reaction, it requires energy. There needs to be an input of energy in order for the chemical reaction to work. And I like to use cellular respiration and photosynthesis as examples here. Photosynthesis that uses that light energy from the sun, that's an input of energy. That's a good example of an endergonic reaction, where cellular respiration is a classical example of the exergonic reaction. Again, exo means to give out, and endo is to take in. So our exergonic reactions release energy. And what this means is that they are releasing energy from the reactants. That happens when we burn glucose or even burn wood in a fire. The energy is being released from glucose in the form of light and heat. So cellular respiration is a good example of an exergonic reaction. It does take many steps. We will study the main stages of cellular respiration in Module 10, but it's a process that does release energy slowly. And that's good because we would quite literally burn up if it wasn't a slow process because of the amount of energy associated with these reactions. So take a look at the YouTube videos that I've added up on this topic, please. So here's the typical graph of the exergonic reaction. The key features are that the reactants have more energy than do the products. On the x-axis is time or progress of the chemical reaction. On the y-axis is the potential energy. The reactants have more potential energy than do the products. And the difference in the energy between the reactants and the products is what is released. And the cell will save this and use it for whatever it needs. It is saved in the form of ATP. This is the exergonic reaction. Oppositely, in the endergonic reactions, they need energy. They require energy in order for the reaction to run. Now, the products here have a lot of energy, but the reactants don't. That is opposite from what we saw with the exergonic reaction. So in the endergonic reaction, our reactants have low energy, but our products are higher. Let's take a look at that. Photosynthesis, again, is a great example. So notice our reactants have lower energy than do the products in the endergonic reaction. And that difference in energy is what is needed. So the cell has to put in that energy in order for the reaction, the endergonic reaction, to run. Now, a living organism is undergoing metabolism, which is simply the sum of all of those chemical reactions. So it's literally thousands of different endergonic and exergonic reactions. Fancy word from metabolism. A metabolic pathway is simply the chemical reactions that are involved in whatever pathway we're studying. So a metabolic pathway typically builds something complex or it breaks it down, right? So we can build things that the cell needs, but then our other side of metabolism is breaking down the material that we eat in our food so that we may obtain energy and building blocks from all of those different molecules. Now, energy coupling is necessary with endergonic reactions because that endergonic reaction needs an input of energy. So what we see is that many reactions are coupled so that there is an input of energy for the endergonic reaction. The cell saves this energy in the form of ATP, which can be harnessed. So here is adenosine triphosphate. We've got 3 phosphates, which is why it's called adenosine triphosphate. And this is used to power all the forms of cellular work that we learned about in Module 8. So it's made of adenosine again, and then a triphosphate tail that has 3 phosphate groups. Now, when ATP is hydrolyzed, the addition of water, that results in the breakdown of ATP into a different molecule called adenosine diphosphate, since there are just 2 phosphates left. But we do have left over this inorganic phosphate group that came off of ATP. This phosphate group can then be recombined with another ADP molecule to make ATP. So the transfer of this removed phosphate group to some other molecule is simply the process of phosphorylation. It means to add a phosphate group. This is our ATP cycle. So it begins with ATP, which is hydrolyzed, as we just saw, into adenine diphosphate plus the inorganic phosphate. This is a process that will release energy so that the cell can use it for whatever it's needed. If we complete the cycle, though, by adding a phosphate group onto adenine diphosphate, this does require energy. It will make ATP. So breaking ATP releases energy. Making ATP takes energy. And this is the ATP cycle. All right, now we're going to transition into the introduction on cellular respiration so that we can apply some of these concepts that we've just learned about about energy. Now, cellular respiration is the harvesting of energy. We've got an aerobic pathway that we're going to study, but there is an anaerobic pathway that we're going to study as well. So again, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are those opposite reactions that are utilized in the global cycling of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and glucose. All of life requires energy. And it comes back to the sun. If we look at almost all of the ecosystems on Earth, that ultimate source of energy is the sun. So through the process of photosynthesis, Some of the energy from that sun is captured in the chloroplast. That is the organelle that a plant uses for photosynthesis. And then the carbon dioxide and water, these are the reactants of photosynthesis, they're rearranged to produce sugar and oxygen. Now, cellular respiration is the opposite pathway. So here, sugar is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. And the cell is able to generate energy through that process. So it's able to make energy. It uses some of this released energy to make ATP. Recall that the generation of ATP, making it, takes energy. Cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria for all eukaryotic cells. It also occurs in the cell membrane of the prokaryotic cells. So the bacteria and archaea that make up those two domains, our two prokaryotic domains, they have similar machinery in their cell membrane so that they can carry out cellular respiration. But as you know, prokaryotes do not have organelles, which means they do not have a mitochondria. A bit of the energy is lost as heat. That's always true. All right, so here is our connection between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide and water with the energy of the sun and converts it into sugars and molecular oxygen through the process of photosynthesis. This happens in the chloroplast, specifically in the thylakoid membranes of those chloroplasts. So think back to the module on cells. It produces glucose, other sugars too, and molecular oxygen. And then these molecules are harnessed in the process of cellular respiration to generate energy. This happens in the inner mitochondrial membrane, the cristae of the membrane. The products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water. So if we think about these two reactions at the level of the ecosystem, there is cycling of these materials throughout the ecosystem. Now, let's differentiate that a little bit from breathing. Sometimes this can be confusing for students. I know it was for me. I understood respiration more as a breathing until I understood cellular respiration. So I imagine that might be where you are now. They're not the same things. Breathing is the exchange of respiratory gases. So we take in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. That's what breathing is. Where cellular respiration is the aerobic harvesting of energy from our food. We do have an anaerobic pathway of cellular respiration that we'll study as well. But when we're talking about all stages, going through all of the stages of cellular respiration, which we'll learn about, this is an aerobic pathway, meaning it does require oxygen or oxygen's in the environment. The anaerobic pathway is called fermentation. And it too is part of cellular respiration. It's just the anaerobic part of cellular respiration. So looking at the connection between breathing and cellular respiration, we breathe in molecular oxygen. It goes into our lungs where it is exchanged very well and loaded into our red blood cells that are then pumped through the body to deliver oxygen to every single cell in our body. The red blood cells are able to help some with the exchange of carbon dioxide, which then is taken back to the lungs so that we can breathe it out. So here is our equation for cellular respiration. Glucose plus molecular oxygen gives us carbon dioxide plus water, and of course, energy. That's the point of it. This chemical equation is not balanced. It does not have the numbers in front of each of the chemical molecules here. So cellular respiration, again, releases energy. It's exergonic, and it's capable of producing, on average, about 32 molecules of ATP for every 1 glucose. This yield can change depending upon different conditions. I'm going to give you a very clear number on it so that there's no ambiguity. We will learn about that in our next module. So we'll go with 32 molecules of ATP produced for every 1 glucose, providing the cellular respiration goes through all stages. This process uses about 34% of the energy out of glucose, which means that 66% of that energy is wasted in the form of heat. This is considered still to be a very efficient process. 34% might seem low, but it's actually quite a bit more efficient than the combustion automobile engine, if you want some comparison. And again, we have evolved to use, and other endothermic organisms have evolved to utilize that heat as part of our core body temperature. So if you think about the level of the organism as opposed to the level of the molecules involved in cellular respiration, we're using it. We're just not using it all for cellular respiration. We're using a good part of it for heat. All right, now this is the balanced chemical equation for cellular respiration. It begins with a molecule of glucose reacting with 6 molecules of molecular oxygen to produce 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and about 32 molecules of ATP, providing we go through all 3 of the main stages of cellular respiration. The reason why there are 3 arrows, 3 chemical arrows or reaction arrows here, is one for each of the 3 stages of cellular respiration. There are 3 main stages, so that's why I'm showing it to you as 3 stages or 3 arrows. The more we go through all 3 stages, the more energy is produced. So as we complete cellular respiration, bits of ATP are produced along the way. Now, if we take this chemical reaction and turn it the other way, with the input of sun energy, we've got photosynthesis. The average adult needs about 2,200 kilocalories of energy per day to meet the needs of the demands of life. So about 75% of that is used to maintain a healthy body. 25% of it is used for our physical activities. So we would lump cellular work into this 75% here. 25% is us moving or running or performing the various physical activities that we wish to do. So we do use the majority of our energy to power the chemical reactions needed to support life. In order to maintain a healthy weight, we really need to have a good balance between the amount of energy or calories we take in versus how many we use. So if we want to lose weight, we need to eat less than this. If we need to gain weight, we would eat more. All right, so let's look at some of the different physical activities in terms of the amount of energy in kilocalories that are utilized to perform these activities. So me just sitting here is using about 28 kilocalories, but swimming is 408. Walking is at 3 miles per hour is about 245. But running is pretty high, dancing is high. I think it really depends what kind of dancer you are, because there's a lot of very aerobic dancing that can be done too. So a person that is more on this scale of the activity either needs to consume more calories to meet all those demands, or they will lose weight. The way that this happens, how do we capture the energy? How do we get the energy out of cellular respiration? How do we get it out of the food that we eat? It happens by transferring electrons out of the molecules we eat. I will encourage you to follow and think of the chemistry of hydrogen as we learn about cellular respiration. Recall that hydrogen has one proton and one electron. It's also part of what makes up glucose. Glucose has 12 hydrogens in it. These hydrogens are really important to follow so that we can track the progress of cellular respiration. And I will show you how to do that. I'll show you how to use it as a way to check your work. So during cellular respiration, electrons actually move off of glucose onto oxygen. Our two reactants, glucose and oxygen. That releases energy just through the transfer of electrons. And since oxygen is electronegative, remember electronegative means that it attracts electrons. Oxygen pulls the electrons that come off of glucose to it. That makes water. So an electron loses energy as it loses potential energy as it's transferred to oxygen. So this brings in a type of chemical reaction called the oxidation reduction reaction, which is often abbreviated as redox. These are coupled reactions. If we have an oxidation reaction, there has to be a reduction. If we have a reduction, there has to be oxidation. It cannot happen without both. Why? Well, what happens is the substance that loses electrons is oxidized. So glucose loses electrons to oxygen. Glucose becomes oxidized. But those electrons have to go somewhere. They don't just float around in space. They combine with oxygen. That is a reduction. The loss of electrons is oxidation. So a molecule is oxidized when it loses one or more of its own electrons. The gain of electrons is reduction. So a molecule is reduced when it gains another electron or two. There's a useful acronym for redox, for oxidation reduction, and it's called OIL-RIG. Oxidation involves electron loss. Reduction involves electron gain. That summarizes all of what we've talked about in this slide. So in our next module, I will show you how to follow those hydrogens so that you can appreciate the oxidation and the reduction components of the redox reaction, which cellular respiration is a great example of a redox reaction. So looking at our balanced chemical equation for cellular respiration, we begin with a molecule of glucose. It loses its electrons oxidation is loss. So glucose is oxidized. It becomes carbon dioxide. The molecular oxygen is going to gain electrons that come off of glucose. They go over here and move on to molecular oxygen to create water. So when we oxidize glucose, it is oxidized to become carbon dioxide. The reduction is with the molecular oxygen. Molecular oxygen gains electrons that came off of glucose. When that happens, it becomes water. And of course, we're generating energy, and there is a release of heat. So the way I like to think about cellular respiration is it's like an energy hill where the electrons fall in a very controlled way so that they come off of glucose and eventually end up at the end of the process, combining with molecular oxygen or part of molecular oxygen to make water. We'll look at that more in the next module. So follow the hydrogens. We're going to follow the carbons too. We've been doing that part all semester. For example, there are 6 carbons in glucose. That is why we have to have a 6 in front of the carbon dioxide, because we have to have 6 carbons in our products if we have 6 carbons in our reactants. We have 18 oxygens on both sides. We have 12 hydrogens on both sides. So when I teach cellular respiration and oxidation reduction reactions, I find it helpful, again, to follow the carbons so that you can balance your equations and properly monitor your reactants and products. But also, we're going to follow those hydrogens. And we can't quite do that yet. We'll look at that more in our next module when we break apart the different stages of cellular respiration. So glucose is going to lose its hydrogen atoms. It becomes oxidized into carbon dioxide. Oppositely, the oxygen gains the hydrogen atoms that came off of glucose, and it becomes reduced into water. So I put 3 big pink stars up here because this is a really important concept to understand. So important that we're going to spend the entire next module talking about cellular respiration. So please reach out to me with questions. I find that that I'm able to really help students if you reach out sooner rather than later. I'm always here for you. I'm just an email away. All right, now this happens with a very important molecule. It's one of the coenzymes we talked about in our last module called NAD+. And it is the electron carrier or shuttle. So let me back up. So when we talk about the electrons coming off of glucose and eventually reacting with molecular oxygen, they do have to go somewhere temporarily. They go here. They go into this NAD+ shuttle. It accepts electrons and it becomes reduced. Reduction is gain into NADH. And now the electron carrier is loaded with the electrons so that it may deposit them with oxygen to create water. So NAD+ is the oxidized form. It is available to carry electrons. It can pick them up and be used. NADH, however, is reduced. It's already carrying the electrons. Those electrons have to be dumped off in order for it to become NAD+ again so that it can be used. So what we're actually seeing is an oxidation and reduction of this molecule. When it is in the form where it's carrying its electrons, NADH, it is reduced. But when it loses those electrons, it becomes oxidized. So think of NAD+ as an electron carrier or an electron shuttle. Here we go. Let's look at that. So we've got a 3-carbon molecule here Doesn't really matter what it is. It is oxidized. So oxidation is loss. So we're going to lose this hydrogen right here. Consequently, we have to have a double bond now to satisfy our octet rules for this carbon and this hydrogen. We've lost both of the hydrogens. So here they are, two hydrogens. They are going to, sorry, it's a little weird so that I could fit everything on one page. So here we have our NAD plus oxidized, and these two hydrogens that came off, they are going to sit in the pockets. And now our NADH is reduced. It's got both of its electron pockets filled. And the way I like to think about it, which may be a little bit overly simplistic, is that really these are hydrogen molecules. They're not just electrons. So the electrons are seated in the carrier, in the shuttle, and the hydrogens are riding along too. So that's why I encourage you to follow the carbons and the hydrogens. Now we're in our reduced form, and this NADH molecule can drop off these hydrogens and create water. Once they go out, it can be used again. This molecule's full now. So this is the oxidation and reduction of the NAD molecule as it transports electrons off of glucose, eventually to oxygen to create water. So our electron transport chain is a process where energy is created as these electrons fall. They move from carrier to carrier to carrier, eventually making it to oxygen to create water. Sitting at the very bottom of the hill is half of molecular oxygen. And this might sound weird. Why didn't I just call it oxygen? Why didn't I just call it molecular oxygen? Well, you can't make water with two hydrogens, with two oxygens. Water is H2O. It only has one O. This is one O. But we can't express it as just O because that is not a chemically stable molecule. It would not exist that way in nature. So it literally is 1/2 O2. It picks up the two electrons, in other words, hydrogens, and becomes reduced to water in a very controlled, step-by-step way, which prevents us from overheating to the point where we would denature our enzymes. So here it is. Here's that energy hill. So up here, we're in high energy. So think of the higher we are, it's higher energy. We begin with our shuttle empty. It picks up electrons that come off of glucose, and it falls in a controlled way through what we call the electron transport chain. NADH is carrying, picks up these electrons and is reduced. NAD plus picks up the electrons and is reduced to NADH, where these electrons and hydrogens eventually combine with 1/2 molecular oxygen to make water, which is the product of cellular respiration, water. And energy is released along the way in a very controlled way. So I do think of it like an energy hill or staircase. And the higher we can start, the more energy can be produced. If we're only starting, say, here in our reaction, there's not as much opportunity to make energy. And there are different cellular conditions and environments that where that will happen. So I hope this was a little bit of a review of some of the material we covered in Module 8, while also introducing this new concept of cellular respiration and the oxidation reduction equations. Once we move into Module 10, our next one, on cellular respiration, I'll break down those 3 stages for you. So, and we'll revisit some of these concepts that we were introduced today. Well, that's it for the Module 9 lecture. I hope you have a great day, a great night, whenever you see this. Take care. Bye bye.